I've been delaying posting this, as it seems very abnormal, and I could be overreacting. However, to begin, I'll quickly go over the type of person my uncle was. He was a very prolific Republican following person. Just before his passing, his wife left him, and the only reason the rest of the family believed she did this was because of his almost obsessive cult-like belief in the occult. He would go hours lecturing us on the deep state and Bill Gates vaccine theories. Mostly, I found them to be funny. I would often see him while I went fishing, and he would be carrying a black Bible with a red trim. I remember him telling me it was a gift from one of his old friends, but I always had a sense of unease whenever I saw the book. It would make me feel very uncomfortable, and I could feel my stomach drop with anxiety. It affected me so much that it still makes me shudder when I think of it. Currently, it's in the attic in a large cupboard box, as we haven't moved or sold most of his belongings yet due to COVID. Almost 17 months after my dear uncle was involved in a collision while drunk driving, he went on an alcoholic rampage after his wife left him. I received the message from his phone number almost a week ago. I thought perhaps that the number had been deactivated as it hadn't been used since his passing. The message was weird to say the least. It was just a string of letters. The text was 412-6521-783-4125. I found it very unsettling as I still have the phone and SIM card, and I know they haven't been interacted with since the accident. The numbers seemed to be incredibly familiar to me when I got the text and had a bad feeling about it. So I checked the attic, and the number almost is a complete match of the book number on his old Bible, with only the 6 being replaced by a 7. To be honest, it could be nothing, but if anyone has any theories, I'd be happy to hear them. Ghosts are the outcome of events that have been imprinted on a specific location. They reflect on the specific moment over and over again, transcending the barrier of time. They're not alive, unaware, and not spirits. I have 2 criteria for something to be a spirit. That is, being a single intelligence with agency and having the ability to comprehend. The media portrays human spirits in denial of their deaths, lingering, attached to homes and people. Human spirits don't have the ability or power to influence our world in this way, let alone spirits tethered to their earthly ambitions. Inhuman spirits have existed since the evolution of man, immortal and unstained by having a body. They can influence the physical world and by nature choose to destroy. Ghosts are not inhuman spirits, yet disturb us here physically. They wander, tethering themselves to old memories, and living a repeated cycle from their life before. Ghosts represent those who lived despite not being actual spirits. So what are they? To explain this, I'd like to briefly discuss 2 things. The first is time, and the second is emotion. Then together, and their connection to the 4th dimensional space. Time was created to 3rd dimensionally comprehend the splices we experience as the present. It doesn't exist in the 4th dimension because there, everything we experience here is a single form of existence, or in better words, it's happening all at the same time. The strength of our emotions transcends the barrier of time, meaning in the terms of the 4th dimension, every emotion has the potential to be felt before and after the emotion is created. This can explain things like déjà vu and cursed historical energy. But if our emotions have the ability to transcend time, why don't we feel those transcendent emotions everywhere, all the time? When it comes to feeling emotions, some are better translatable than others. This is less a talent of the psyche and more on the emotion itself. When you walk into work and nothing appears different, however, there is an atmosphere that makes you uncomfortable. Then later you find out at the time your boss was firing an employee in the back room. We feel emotions often in our present lives that they're strong enough. So how do our emotions become fourth dimensional? They have to be strong enough. When we encounter ghosts and hauntings, these are the emotions that are strong enough. There are calm and angry ghosts, however. The most common types of ghosts are the latter: upset, angry, or evil. Hate and anger are extremely strong emotions. In the current moment, an event of raw and powerful anger would result in negative energy, slamming doors, stomping, and breaking objects. People report paranormal encounters of women laughing, pianos playing, knocking on doors, etc., which can all be signs of an event where raw happiness was experienced. It's also the reason sights of murder and extreme sadness produce ghosts. I was raised in a sheltered, religious, but scientific household, and it was all a big part of my childhood structure. As I learned how to speak, I also started talking about my imaginations, like all children do. It would only make sense that some of them would involve things related to religion. But in between my development and imagination, I witnessed contingencies I could never mistake for a child's imagination. I've only had one experience where I was personally targeted by something. I was 11 years old and home alone. I was part of a swim team and was at a meet all weekend. I had come home to the house empty, and this wasn't uncommon. My family was fairly active on the weekends, going on hikes and camping trips. When I got home, I had gotten ready for bed, did some reading, and attempted to sleep. Every time I started to fall asleep, I would feel something rack my body, like a strong pulse waving of anxiety, forcing me back awake. This happened 3 or 4 times, with the feeling of dread increasing each time. After an hour of becoming progressively paranoid, I remembered some unsolicited shaman advice my mom's crazy friend had told me. The summary of their friendship was she cornered my mother at a church event and forced them to be friends. Aggressive, but it worked. She was loud, opinionated, and claimed to see demons and visions. She watched us for a week when my parents went to Hawaii. I overshared information about how my parents argued sometimes. She told me they were arguing because they had evil spirits affecting their emotions, and that the next time I heard them arguing, I needed to walk straight into their room with my arm up to the square, saying, "In the power of God I rebuke thee." So at home, all alone, I climbed out of bed, stood in the middle of my room, and raised my arm. However, when I did, the feeling of dread became so strong I could barely stand. The pulses were debilitating, as if I had a maxed subsystem in my chest instead of a heart. I didn't hear myself when I rebuked whatever was in my room, but after I did, it stopped immediately. Then, a figure stood in front of me, but I could see it clearly in my dark room. Darker than darker. Positioned staring at me. I can only explain it like someone dressed in a black morph suit, blurred from terrible video resolution. I could feel disappointment from it, and it shook its head slowly to emphasize it. I turned away from me, through the windowed wall towards the outside of my house. After it left, I stood there recovering. Then I remembered I hadn't brushed my teeth, so I went and brushed them, fixed my bed sheets, and just went back to bed. I didn't give it up much thought the next morning, or even for the next few years. I remember bringing it up once offhandedly to my mom, and she said that I needed to stop telling my stories like they were real, because that would make them lies, but she thought it was a cool story. And that was it, until 3 years later. My dad moved and my mother's crazy friend was watching us for their trip to Hawaii. I talked about my parents' relationship and she gave me advice about how to get rid of the spirits that were influencing them. It sat wrong with me. That's when I remembered back to the figure in my bedroom. My parents hadn't gone to Hawaii and my mom didn't know her crazy friend either. I had used advice from a memory I didn't have yet. And then I remembered how terrifyingly wrong that night was. How I had been metaphysically attacked, performed a ritual I don't know existed, stood in the presence of a vibrating shadow man, watched him phase through my wall on the second story to the outside, and just went back to bed. It took years for me to fully grasp what happened that evening. Since then, I took what I saw and started tearing it apart, analysing it. At the time of my transcendent epiphany, I had another where I have more than most when experiencing these phenomenons. The result led to me grow fascinated with abstract reality. I wanted to know how I could make this make sense. So I began researching, looking for explanations, and expanding my talents. I ended up practicing under a spiritualist who continues to teach me. My dad moved into a house in the middle of the woods about 2 years ago, and I moved in with him soon after to help him get around and take care of the house and whatnot. Side note, it's an old house on land that Native Americans heavily inhabited, in the south. Honestly, this house is really weird. The first night I spent here, I was woken up by a woman whispering, "Is anyone home?" right next to me as I was about to fall asleep. My dad didn't believe me when I told him the next day. It's taken a while to get used to living in the deep woods, but something about this property is off. There's been more than a few times where I've actually felt a heavy presence, almost like someone is standing right behind me. I have a cat who I rely on to alert me when there's someone approaching my room, and there have been times where he's alerted me, but nobody was there. Other times he stares at the same corner of my room with an expression that tells me he can see something I can't. There's been more times I can count where I'll be leaving a room and a cabinet will slam, or it sounds like something was moved behind me. It sounds silly, but it's odd enough for me to notice. I've mentioned it to my father, but he didn't think much of it, until early this AM when he woke up and went downstairs to find the basement flooded. Somehow, the shower in the basement was turned on and the drain had been clogged. Neither of us used the shower in the basement. He's now fully convinced there's a ghost in the house. So, I've recently returned to the home where I grew up for my entire life. And I've always known there was something paranormal in that house, but I didn't realise the extent of it until leaving and coming back. So to preface, I used to have extreme night terrors almost every night in that house, but I just chalked it up to being a kid who was easily scared and having it bleed over into my sleep. But upon returning and staying for a while, they were back and worse than before. The first night I dreamt that I had woken up and that something had crawled across my feet and was grabbing me and trying to pull me. The second night was worse in my opinion because the pulling continued, but something was standing at the foot of my bed and was so tall its head hit the ceiling. I couldn't make out features, but I knew it was staring at me. And on top of that, my vanity mirror had lights shooting in and out of it and what looked like hands coming out of it. I've had many experiences in that home besides that, and I have been grabbed many times while being fully aware and awake. My mom also had extreme night terrors and would see humanoid figures crawl across her ceiling and into her closet. A side note about my room, there has always been a cold spot at the end of my bed where I saw the figure standing. And no matter what time of the year, it's always there. Also, when I was growing up, we had multiple dogs and cats and all of them avoided my room and would only go in if forced to. And if locked in, would whine and cry and scratch at the door and would stare at me absolutely nothing. The entire house had a bad feeling, but my room was by far the worst. I didn't know what it is. And would like to know any thoughts and opinions, please. The first one was a scene that would play in my brain early in the morning. It would happen completely outside of my control, like someone was flipping a switch. It was a small snippet of our family. My brother and I with our father standing behind us. Our mother would be standing a few feet away, hysterical with tears, trying to sing "What a Wonderful World." But due to the intensity of the crying, the words would be stuttering and unclear. It seems pretty tame now, but when I was young, it left me feeling totally freaked out and anxious. Now, I am willing to concede that this may not have been paranormal. My parents' marriage wasn't great, and as such, and there wasn't physical abuse, I've come to learn that my mother is a narcissist who uses emotional manipulation to get what she wants. I can wholeheartedly imagine that this image was a reaction in my own brain to my mother's behaviour and not necessarily anything spooky. However, the experience that followed this strange scene, usually, not always, has a far darker connotation. After the image of my mother's breakdown singing dissipated, I would look around at my bedroom wall to be met with a face protruding from it, as if the face itself had morphed from the wallpaper. It was white, with black pupils in its eyes. It spoke in a low voice, always rapidly, and always said the same 3 nonsense words. I wouldn't know how to spell them, and after several attempted searches, have no clue as to what they might mean. Anyway, my best guess is Owa Ninja Toby. They look silly written down, to be sure, but as a young boy still in nursery, they were terrifying words. As I approached the age of 35, I still refuse to say them out loud. The last thing I want is to see that face again that sent me running through to my parents' bedroom in tears. We moved out in 1991, the year I started school, and it never appeared in our new home. I went back to the house with my mum when she visited the new owner, which would have been in late 96, early 97. I stayed in the hallway, not wanting to venture into any room in case I should once again encounter whatever it was that had haunted my childhood. At the time, I was struggling. My parents had divorced in the couple of months before the visit, and my emotions were all over the place. Before we left, I took a few steps forward to look into the old living room and the playroom beyond, which was now a dining room. As I moved past the kitchen, I saw it emerge above the countertop. As I locked eyes with it, I expected to hear the usual nonsense words. Instead, it just stared, with a stern, menacing look. I walked slowly backwards and out of its line of sight. Since then, I've never seen it. After a few years, I began to think it must be my own mind expressing psychological stress. The childhood my brother and I shared was not a stable one. There was a lot of shouting and tension, which only got worse after our parents split. My brother and I were both affected by it, and we both bear scars. It made sense to me that when I was so young, the only way my brain could cope with something like that would be to personify it and give it a face. Cut to October 2005. My brother and I are watching Most Haunted live with my mum. It's Halloween night, and we get to tell some spooky stories. My mum tells us about the transparent people she used to see in her room as a child, going in and out of her wardrobe. She told the story without any fear, saying that it became a natural occurrence after the initial shock. It weirded me out, because I had slept in that same room in my grandparents' house, thankfully not having ever seen anything. I was building up to recounting my story. As a child, when the apparitions were at their height, I had been warned not to tell my brother. He was 2 years younger and would not have coped with the fear. However, I felt that a 17-year-old would cope a little better than a toddler. I opened my mouth to start the tale, and my brother cuts in. He then spends the next 5 minutes telling my mother and I about the face he used to see on the bedroom wall in the old house. He even said the words. My first look was to my mother. I could only believe that my brother had told her as I had, and that she had kept it from both of us to avoid winding each other up and scaring each other all the more. She was as shocked as I was. She remembered clearly my experience, the tears, the early morning freakouts, the reluctance to sleep in my own bed. My brother had never mentioned it. He had written it off as a bad dream, and though he may have been upset by it, he had never fully disclosed details to either of my parents. When I told him that I had also seen it, he became quite despondent, clearly shaken by the thought that it might not have been a nightmare. My brother's a grown man now and a father, and a confirmed atheist with a strong disbelief in anything spiritual. He still refuses point blank to discuss anything to do with the face, and visibly pales when the subject comes up. Hearing my brother tell the same story left a lasting impression on my emotions, and has forever altered my perception of what may well have been a haunting, perhaps even a demonic infestation. I share it here to invite comments and opinions. I'm open-minded about interpretations and points of view regarding what it might have been and where it might have come from. I might never get a definitive answer. However, I thought it would be fun to get outside opinions. About 8 years ago, my family moved into a new house that was abandoned halfway through, building it. I was so excited because I finally would get my own room. I was 10 when we moved in, and I had 4 younger siblings. Big family. After getting settled and living in the house for about a month, my family paid a casual trip to my grandparents' house that was only about 5 minutes away. Now, I've been to their house thousands of times, and even lived there when my parents were looking for a home. There was nothing out of the ordinary here, except it was a mansion in the middle of a ranch. It went as any other evening would go, and my dad buckled us kids up in our minivan. He walked back to the front porch to say goodbye to Grandma and Grandpa with my mom. While sitting in the van, I noticed a man standing on the balcony above us, just staring at me, through the window, directly above my parents. I nudged my sister and pointed, and she saw him too. We laughed and waved, thinking it was my grandpa, but he didn't smile back. We didn't think anything of this, and when we got home, my sister brought it up to my mom. She panicked, telling my dad to call the police, thinking that someone broke into their house. I told them it was Grandpa, but they responded, "No, Molly, we were talking to both Grandpa and Grandma on the front porch, remember?" I was immediately confused, but after the sheriff came by, a quick inspection pushed all anxiety out the door, and we never talked about it again. But things only got worse from then on. I felt like a person was breathing down my neck at every waking moment. I saw orbs in the bathroom mirrors and couldn't go in there without the door open. I started asking my mom really strange questions like, did someone die in this house? And when she said the home was brand new, I would ask her, well, did someone die while building this place? Of course, my parents thought nothing of this and ignored all the red flags. About a year later, I was home alone watching my siblings, and they all fell fast asleep on the couch watching a movie. Suddenly, I looked up to see a figure. No, a small child on the stairs, just staring at me, holding the bars, crouched down. My heart lurched into my throat as I whipped my head around to count my siblings. I called my mom, begging her to come home, so they did. But while I waited, the child never moved. I tried to tell my mom what happened, but she claimed it was a dream or my imagination. It hurt to know I was really alone in this. Things just kept getting so much worse though. I would have panic attacks late at night, hallucinations of people chasing me and trying to kill me. I walked all over the house, and always ended up over my parents' bed just staring at them. I had a reoccurring dream of a spirit taking me away from my family, dragging me out of my house. I would see people out of the corner of my eye, and of course, more horrid incidents occurred. One night, while I was asleep, when I heard my door creak open. Now, let me explain the layout of my childhood bedroom. My bed was centered in the middle of my room, with a desk on one side and a 16-gallon fish aquarium on the other. The aquarium lit up my entire room, so it was never dark. I had a dresser across from me with a door across from my aquarium. I heard the door creak open slowly and I jolted awake, staring at the door. The child walked in, but there was something seriously wrong. It was pitch black, a silhouette, with ragged hair and a nightgown on. I know, typical demonic stuff. I had never been more petrified in my entire life. I could move or scream or anything. The thing walked slowly until it reached my aquarium only a foot away from my head. I lifted an arm and tapped the glass, then started rocking back and forth. I pulled the covers over my head and tried to breathe. I was terrified. I don't know how long I was under the covers, but after what felt like hours, I peeked to see nothing there. But my door was still wide open. I lunged out of bed and ran all the way down to my parents' room below me. I screamed and cried, trying to convince them what happened, but they insisted it was my sister. I refused to step foot in my room for days. A week later, I finally felt better about the incident. My dad and I rearranged all the furniture in my room to make me feel safe. My bed was in a corner, my desk was turned around facing my room, and the aquarium had a dim light so I couldn't see my room. I was changing into a paranoid little girl who could barely step foot into her own home. My mom noticed too. She was worried, but thought my anxiety was getting worse because I was having panic attacks every other night, screaming about deranged dreams I'd had. Finally, one morning, my dad called everyone into the living room, very pale and very serious. "I have something to tell you," he said, "but I don't want you to be scared. It's over now." He went on to tell us about the night prior. He was woken up by my mom, who left the room to check on the baby upstairs. Suddenly, he was covered by a dark mist that was pressing him into his bed, strangling him. He yelled, but no one heard him. He tried to fight back, but he was paralyzed. As a religious man, he used the power of God to command the spirit to leave and never come back again. My mom heard nothing when she came back. Once he finished, my 6-year-old sister came out with her own experiences. Yes, there's more, and again, it gets worse. My mom wasn't telling me things. My sister's friends, all of them, refused to step foot in her room. "I don't like that room," they would say. "There's something very bad in there." They would always ask to go home early and never wanted to come back. One of the kiddos claimed that a scary girl ran out of the closet and out of the bedroom, into the hallway and didn't come back. Even my sister had her own incident. There were 3 men telling me that I wasn't leaving. They were laughing at me. Even Maggie, who was only 3, was crying. So I crawled into her crib and covered her eyes. They never went away. I was shocked that I wasn't the only one, and no one was sharing this with me. I was angry and scared. Why would they not believe me? I was alone, dealing with this demon for years. So many questions have come into my mind. It was a demon, no doubt. Was I sleepwalking because I was possessed? Research concluded that for me. I indeed very possibly could have been possessed. Demons take the form of children. That explains the girl. Every time I share this story, the feelings come back and the trauma comes back. When I tell this to my friends, they cry. I revisit that night in my room when the spirit was only inches away, taunting me. This has scarred me for the 8 years that I've tried to move on, and I just can't. But why me? Why was it so obsessed with me? And why did it follow my family home? I guess we'll never know. When I was 9 years old, my family moved to a brand new house in Berks County, Pennsylvania. It was a new construction house, but the property was older, and there used to be old logging trails that people would cut wood down and drag it down. For the first few years, everything was fine. Nothing crazy that I can remember. When I was about 12 or 13, I started noticing weird things. I would be downstairs in the basement. The dog would be lying next to me, and I would hear people walking upstairs while nobody was home. I remember one time I went to take a shower and kept hearing somebody walk past the door. I was convinced somebody was in my house trying to rob it. I opened the door, nobody was there. Fast forward to when I was in 7th grade. It was just after Christmas, and I'd gotten my first cell phone. I was up late texting my girlfriend, and I kept feeling as if somebody was behind me, watching me. I kept looking behind me to see nothing, until the last time I saw her. It was an old lady with long, shaggy blonde hair. I freaked out. The next thing you know, she was gone. A few months later, I had a friend come to my house. I was in the shower and told him to just come in and watch TV in the living room until I got out. I get out of the shower and my friend is pale white. I ask him what's wrong, and he asks if my grandmother or somebody else was at the house. I told him no. And he described that same old lady I had seen, and this was before I even told him. I sat down and told him the situation, and we were both freaked out. So after this, I didn't see her physically, but I remember being in 8th or 9th grade and waking up every night at the same time from a horrible nightmare. I forget the time now. In this nightmare, I would see the old lady and she would kill me in every dream, but in a different way. This absolutely freaked me out. After I had this happen, I told some of my closest friends and they started telling me they saw weird things at my house. Orbs in rooms, the old lady, bad dreams. I remember the one night, it was me and a buddy laying there. He was on the floor and I was on the bed. I felt something touch my leg and I jumped a little. At the same time, he jumped as well. I asked him why, and he told me something touched his leg. Now, I can't exactly say what happened. If the property was possibly haunted, or maybe something happened that triggered me to see this, I'm not sure, but whatever it was, creeped me the hell out. Yeah, growing up there was this white house that was on the corner of Euclid and Hazard I've always passed by. Ever since I was a little kid, this house was mostly vacant. If it were occupied, people would move out within 3 months. My mom told me when she moved from Vietnam to OC, she would always walk from her place to La Quinta, and kids would share different stories about the house. My mom told me the most well-known was this pregnant woman who was hit outside the house. She dragged herself onto the doorsteps of the house and started banging on the door. Nobody answered, and she died on the steps. Ever since then, the house has been haunted by the woman. What's weird is that there was this liquor store across from the house that was apparently haunted too. My mom told me when she was in high school, she would stop by and buy chips and shit, but the clerk would always look kind of shook. Since she was a regular, she asked the clerk if things were good. They said that weird shit started happening. She told me bottles of liquor would start being knocked over at night when the store was closed, and the clerk was losing money. What's sad is my mom told me the owner of the liquor store might have gone crazy. The liquor store was demolished and there's nothing but a plot of land there now. It's been empty for as long as I can remember. I'm 20 now, but I'm confident that the plot of land has been empty longer than I've been alive. Growing up, I was always curious about the house. My curiosity kinda shook me a little bit. When I was 18, I decided to go outside of the house and just try to see if shit would happen to me. Nothing happened, and I left because there was a family already living inside the house, and I didn't want them to call the cops on me. Now that I'm 20, it never occurred to me to try and check out that plot of land to see if there are any spirits. I hit up my buddy who's well versed in paranormal stuff. My buddy got some artemisia and clothes as an offering to the spirits. Another thing he bought was a wax candle and can of Budweiser. Gross. We drove there at around 11:30. When we got there, I showed my buddy the house first, and it's currently for sale, which was weird, since people have been living there for the past 3 years. At the time, we figured that the spirit had been at peace, but now that the family is moving out, we're assuming things are picking up again. After we checked out the house, we headed over to the plot of land. When we got there, I wanted to hop the fence to get into the plot of land, but my friend Reggie didn't want to get arrested. so we stood right outside where the fence ended. We actually started setting up at where the frame of the liquor sign was. It was still a part of the property, but just outside the fence. I forgot to mention, we already saw some people camping on the plot of land. My friend placed the Artemisia enclosed as an offering to the spirit. He placed the candle on the frame of the liquor sign and lit it. My friend raised a pendant and told me to hold his hand. We were trying to get the spirit to sway the pendant as a form of communication. The pendant didn't sway, but the fire from the candle kept on going out, but diminishing. It kept on diminishing. We asked if there was a spirit. If there was a spirit, diminish the flame. It diminished. We decided if it diminished the fire, it was a yes. We asked the spirit if it was connected to the woman hit in front of the house. No answer. My grammar is shit, but I'm gonna give the questions my friend I asked and the answers from what I remembered. Were you once a living being? No answer. Were you created by someone? Diminish. Do you enjoy our presence? Diminish. Are you connected to the woman that got hit? No answer. Are you an evil spirit? Diminish. This is when I started to almost shit myself a little. Mind you, the flame was standing still nearly the whole time. Also, cars passed by and looked at us like we were kooks. Did you knock over those bottles of liquor when the store was present? Diminish. I asked this next question as a joke to ease the tension. Are you racist? Diminish. Are you a Hispanic spirit? Diminish. Do you hate Asians? Diminish. We figured the spirit might have been created out of spite for the sudden flood of Vietnamese people in the 70s. I'm Asian. Those answers kinda cracked me up, not gonna lie. Things got kind of ominous after that. Do you want us to step on the plot of land? Diminish. Would we be safe on the plot of land? No answer. Would we get hurt on the plot of land? Diminish. Do you want to hurt us? Diminish. Can we return with more people? Diminish. Can we leave? No answer. Will we be safe driving back home? No answer. After that, my friend said a proper goodbye and lit the candle. I was way too spooked to continue, so we just fucking dipped. I drove my friend home, and nothing bad happened to us. We made it home safe. I have no clue if that shit was just a coincidence that the candle was diminishing, but too breezy of a night for the flame to be completely still and not go out after diminishing so much. I don't know. Guess I believe in ghosts now. There's something visiting me. I just keep tearing up for no reason every time I think about it. It's not sadness. My eyes just tear up for no reason when I think about it. Since December 2020, it happened 3 times. I can't fully remember which specific days it was, but I've just went to sleep and next morning when I wake up, I open my eyes and I can see this sun or flower-shaped black figure spinning on the wall. It was probably 5 by 5 inches big. I just open my eyes and I see it spinning, then slowly fading away into the wall. My brain is too slow to process it and I just ignore it. I've never tried to touch it or anything. I just keep looking at it until it disappears into the wall. It reminds me of a portal because of its sun shape and how it spins. When I see it, I have the feeling that it's alive and that it's trying to contact with me. It happened 2 times during the last weeks of December 2020, probably in a 5-day gap. Then it never showed up until somewhere around the 5th to the 15th of January 2021. In fact, a couple days before the figure showed up again in 2021, I had a really disturbing experience. I spent the whole night up on my computer, just watching random entertaining stuff on YouTube. Then I went to sleep at 6 AM. Once I laid down, I was struggling to fall asleep. My bed was all messy, so I started trying to fix my sheets with my feet. It seemed incredibly entangled, despite being 6 AM and some light was coming through the holes in the blinds. Everything was still almost pitch dark in my room. I was able to barely see my desk and everything around because of that foggy, dark blue morning atmosphere. I became anxious because I couldn't fix the damn sheets. I started feeling watched. I wanted to cover myself up, but I just couldn't fix it. Neither I wanted to sit down on my bed to grab the sheets, because the idea that something would be staring at me at the end of the bed was putting pressure on me. Then I started choking. I couldn't swallow, and I was also struggling to breathe. Then I started seeing disturbing faces around me. It was big white smiles, their mouth all distorted, and their eyes were small red circles. I just got so scared that I stood up and tried to run out of my bedroom. As I jumped off my bed, the faces were all around me like a 360 video. It was still dark, as I said, and I was really desperate, so I crashed into my desk. I broke my lamp and made all my books fall down from my desk. I stuck my hands to my closet by almost hugging it and tried to slide through it so I could guide myself to where I was. And then I felt my room door handle, so I just ran the hell out of there to my mother's bedroom. I sat on her bed and tried to wake her up, but she was too asleep. I just laid there next to her and I felt peace. I fell asleep next to her till around 10 a.m. She asked why I was there. I just said that I felt safe being next to her. After that, she woke up and left the room. I kept sleeping for some extra minutes. Then I just went back to my bedroom and saw all the mess on the floor that I caused while trying to escape. My lamp, my phone, plugs, wires, and my own sheets. It literally looked like a fight happened in there. It was already bright inside because of the time, so I just picked it up and opened my window and let the sunlight in. The air was fresh, and the sunlight felt warm and full of good energy. Everything felt peaceful, so I comfortably went back to sleep. Once I woke up, I remembered what happened, and I couldn't believe that really happened. It felt like a dream, but it wasn't. It did happen. Everything was okay for 2 or 3 days. Then, as I said, I saw this black figure on my wall when I woke up, and no, I don't have any mental illness. There is no register of schizophrenia in my family or anything. I don't know how to start this. About a few weeks ago, I had this growing red mark on the fold on my left arm. The pain aches like a heart attack in my arm. It started to get yellow crust on it too. I didn't want to go to the hospital because of the pandemic. I have awful medical phobia, if you will. I went to sleep and said, alright, I'll just sleep it off, as I do all the time when I'm sick or in pain, etc. I remember having a dream of my grandmother that passed away when I was 21. I'm 33 now, and she passed away in a nursing home from pneumonia and breathing-related stuff. I don't like to get too personal, but yeah. Someone that I lived with was awake and in the living room, I believe, and I was in the bedroom in bed asleep. I do not believe that the TV was left on, so I couldn't have picked it up in my dream or sleep. The dream was in a hospital or nursing home setting. My grandmother Martha was in a bed looking over at me. I've had dreams of her in the past that never scared me before, so I went on in the dream. There's only me, my grandmother, and a nurse. The nurse, a dark-haired female, 40s or 50s aged, I say, comes over to me sitting down with an IV pole with clear fluid in it. I start yelling, saying stuff like, no, I don't want it, I don't want to be here, etc. I don't want to die. My grandmother looks at me and says, you're going to die. My grandmother would never say those things to me in real life or a dream. I remember eating a dangerous or handful of Tums in my dream and becoming sick and vomiting. I don't really remember anything else. So I woke up in the start and almost kicked over a tiny fold-up table I had next to the bed with stuff on it. I go storming into the living room and the bathroom, all over my house. I end up telling the dream to someone I live with, and they don't know what to think. I went right to the phone, made an appointment, and told the person I live with that I'm going to urgent care. I can't wait. I get dressed and it takes me 2 minutes to walk to urgent care. I didn't know if it was COVID rash, stress, some other kind of skin thing that I already have, or worse. Long story short, they said I had cellulitis and gave me 2+ weeks of antibiotics and steroids. Was Nana warning me to get help that I so needed? Was it a warning from the other side, and she knew something I didn't? My grandmother helped me even though she passed away. Some of you may not believe that it's true, but it did happen, and I decided to share my crazy story. I can't myself believe it either. I helped Martha in life before she passed. Was it her turn to help me and return the favour? The antibiotics ended up increasing my ALT levels and had to get a blood test though. I was really scared something else was wrong with me or my liver. I asked Martha, is there something wrong? Please come to me and tell me. Sometimes nothing goes on. Am I okay? Nana did not come quiet. Fast forward, I got a note from my nurse saying the ALT is normal. Nana didn't say anything because she knew I was fine. To give a little background, my family, mom, dad, older brother and I, moved to Tennessee in 1995 from Mexico. We moved to a very old ranch-style home in Knox County and didn't realize that this home would be the site of some of the most harrowing and terrifying experience I've ever experienced. I'm convinced that many occurrences have been suppressed in my mind, but I want to share with you the memories I do remember. My hand is shaking as I type this out, as these experiences haunt me to this day and are not easy to talk about. The activity in the house first began with the usual paranormal stuff you hear about. Missing items, misplaced or moved belongings, strange creaks or noises around the house, nothing that can't logically be explained. It wasn't until we decided to add a room to the home about 4 to 5 months in that shit really began to hit the fan. I began to experience unusual things a few times a week, to almost every single night thereafter. To give some perspective on the layout of the home, upon entering, the living room is the first thing you see. To the left is a small hallway leading to my parents' bedroom. To the right of the living room is a very long and narrow hallway that leads to a guest room, then the room my brother and I shared for a short while. The hall ends with a bathroom and the entryway to the kitchen, an extra room, directly across from my brother and I's room. Essentially, my room was on the complete opposite end of the house from my parents' room. Anyways, now that the picture is set, I will describe several of my experiences. While my brother slept in the room, I would experience nightly terrors in which I would see someone standing at my doorway. It would never move, but the only way to describe it was a tall, shadowy figure with noticeably long, white, string-like hair. It would watch me several times a week, and I would feel so terrified that all I would be able to do is cover my head with my blanket and pray it would go away. I told my parents that I had seen after the first night, but they merely chalked it up as me having a bad nightmare. Typical. Eventually, it got to a point where I began to sleep on my side with a blanket over my head, with a small opening for me to look through. This continued for 2 years until my brother got his own room. That's when things really took a turn for the worst. I remember sleeping at night and seeing the same shadowy figure standing at my doorway. Feeling just as terrified as the previous time seeing it, I did the usual go and covered my face with my blanket, hoping upon uncovering myself, it would be gone. This time was very different. Upon uncovering my face, the same figure was standing in the room, merely feet from my bed. I panicked and covered my head again, wondering if I was going mad. Upon uncovering my head once again, I saw that it had gone, and with a sigh of relief, I turned onto my back. This was not a good move. Upon turning onto my back, I saw the same figure was now floating over my bed on the ceiling. I was on the top bunk, so you can imagine how close it was. The only way I can accurately describe this humanoid-like entity is that it looked like a mix of a grey alien and a very tall crypt keeper from that one show. The second I saw it, I covered my face once again and felt absolutely petrified with fear. I then felt the figure lay on top of me as I lay frozen on my back. I remember hearing it breathing, sounding like a quiet, almost asthmatic wheeze, and how cold its breath felt. I remember the distinct earthy smell emanating from its mouth as it breathed inches from my face, the only barrier being my blanket. It felt like I was past, frozen in terror, feeling completely helpless. This occurrence was something that began to happen almost every night, and only happened to me, maybe because I was the youngest. Throughout my time living in that house, things progressively got worse. I would be lying in my bed reading a book with all the lights on, when I would begin to hear scratching under my bed. I would peek under and be overcome with the same paralysis I would feel at night, and the feeling of the figure lying on top of me. I would feel it pull me off my bed and onto the floor in the middle of my room, and stare into my soul as I kept my eyes closed in sheer terror. My mom would later recount several times in which she would walk into my room and see me lying in the middle of the room on my back. She would ask me what I'm doing, to which I would essentially snap out of it and tell her I was fine, too scared to talk about what had happened. I remember if I slept on my chest, I would feel like a force would pick me up 2 to 3 feet by my shirt and drop me back onto my bed. This happens so often to this day that I'm reluctant to sleep on my chest, not because I'm afraid I'll be picked up. I'm now a 220-pound adult man, good luck. But because something in my subconscious mind tells me that it's not a good position to be in. My parents would tell me that I just had nightmares all the time, but they didn't realise this nightmare was something I experienced every night. Years later, having endured this every night, I began to see an additional apparition in the home. I began to see a young boy in the long stretch of narrow hallway that my bedroom was situated in. I would see him peeking out of different rooms at me while I was in the hallway, only to disappear out of sight into rooms, only to see he had disappeared upon my investigation. That would be the extent of my interaction with him, but I would see him often and only during the daytime. The apparition did not appear to be malicious, unlike the other figure that tormented me at night. He gave me the impression that he was merely an observer, which was comforting in a way, that this ghost didn't want to mess with me, unlike that crypt keeper entity. Over a decade later, now living in Atlanta, I decided to look up the address on Google Maps to show a friend and noticed that the home was now the site of a home business. Upon seeing that, I decided that I would reach out to them out of curiosity and see if they had any similar experiences. The business would later reply, saying that they had never had more electronic issues in the home than anywhere they had ever been, and that strange things occurred frequently. He told me that his wife and kids complained about seeing a little boy wandering around the hallway and was scared to live in the home. The man also described seeing a tall shadow occasionally when he was working in his office, which actually turned out to be my old bedroom. He told me he always felt like he was being watched and felt generally uneasy in that room in particular. What is peculiar about this is that I had not described any of my experience prior to him telling me this, yet our stories appeared to line up. I showed my parents the message thread I had with this business, and it was then that they confirmed that they believed the house was haunted. They didn't want to say anything that would scare me even more and tried to bury it under the guise that I was having nightmares. My mother said that she would see the same little boy wandering around the kitchen and hallway, and she always felt that feeling of being watched when no one was home but her. Neither of them had seen the tall figure, and it seemed it was focused on me. The experiences I had in that home are permanently burned into my mind, and I will never forget that tall, wire-haired figure that constantly picked me up, laid on me, and pulled me around, terrifying me to the core. I do not plan on ever returning to that home, and I pray no one who has the misfortune of living there experiences what I did on a nightly basis for 6 fucking years. I've always been curious about deep hypnosis and what it may reveal to me, but I'm equally terrified to remember events that my own mind deemed too traumatic to keep in my conscious mind. So as a child, about 7 years old, my parents bought a house and we moved. It always creeped me out, but also sometimes gave me an odd calming feeling like I belonged there, which was arguably way more creepy. Very quickly, I noticed when alone or in the dark, but sometimes also with people, I would experience an intense feeling in my back, like when someone is staring at you from behind. It would make the hair on my neck stand up and give me goosebumps. I used to be so scared that I would run out of the room, keep my back away from doors or windows, and always keep the lights on as a way of being able to see if someone was actually suddenly watching me. Still experience it in adult life. It just doesn't scare me now, and it's way less intense. I started suffering from horrific night terrors, sleep paralysis, dreams within dreams, and one time shared an entire dream with someone. The dreams almost always had a common theme of something or someone violently coming after me. After a long time of dealing with this, I started rewinding dreams when they became nightmares and changing details. That seemed to stop the nightmares, or at least turn them back into decent dreams. One night, as I was sleeping, I had a very annoying feeling that kept bothering me. I was awake, but tired and wanted to go back to sleep, so I kept trying to sleep through it, and I kept my eyes shut. I thought the light in my room might have been on, that I'd fallen asleep without turning it off. The kind of feeling where you're annoyed, but not enough to open your eyes and fix it. After a few moments, it kept bugging me, so I opened my eyes. To my immediate horror, there were people in my room. They were standing under the window facing my direction, dressed in black cloaks with hoods, and I couldn't see their faces. The one in the centre had a black book opened, and they were all chanting what sounded like Alalala ja ja ja. No idea how to spell that. A chill went down my spine and I was frozen in terror. I wanted to scream, but I didn't want them to know I was awake or that I was looking at them. I was scared they were going to hurt me. At the foot of my bed was the light, and I wanted to reach for it and turn it on. But I was frozen with fear. Very quickly, I'd noticed the one in the centre looked up from the book directly at me as they all stopped chanting. Immediately I screamed and threw my entire body to the foot of the bed, hit the light and fell back into the corner. Instantly, they were gone. I wanted to run down the stairs, but I physically couldn't. All I could do was shake and cry with my back in the corner. My mom came running upstairs, wrapped her arms around me, trying to comfort me, and asked what was happening. I wanted to tell her, but I physically couldn't. After a little bit, I gathered some strength and ran down the stairs, jumped over the couch, and hid, looking at the stairs. She followed me down, and after a little bit, I calmed down enough to tell her. Weird stuff happened to me constantly after moving to that house, even when at other places. I've experienced stuff moving on its own, TVs powering on and off by themselves, radios suddenly powering on, the volume turning up and then mysteriously powering off, light bulbs exploding, even a cable box that would channel to 666 and turn off every time it was powered on. Just all kinds of stuff. This stuff doesn't really faze me anymore. Anyways, I thought you all might find my experience interesting. I've done some research trying to figure out what book they might have been reading from, or what language they could have been chatting. According to Google Translate, it might possibly be ancient Hebrew, but I honestly have no idea, because spelling it seems impossible. What are all your thoughts? Have you all ever heard or witnessed anything like that?